At the University of Ljubljana, we want to demonstrate that university is deeply embedded in the Slovenian society. Our research can significantly contribute to solving challenges of our time. This is why this year we have established the Hudsklad, SSHA Fund of the University of Ljubljana. With it, we support researchers in their quest to increase the wider impact of their research. In addition to the fund, we are planning a series of impact-related trainings, and this is one of them. But how do we achieve meaningful impact? First, we need to think about what we wish to achieve. Then we need to plan activities for engagement, and then we need to track and evaluate the results and possibly our impact. And this is what today is all about, the Fast Track Your Research Impact with Mark Reed. And let me say something about Mark. Mark is a researcher of ecosystem markets and environmental governance. And he studies how researchers can generate and share their knowledge so they can change the world. He has also been, and he still is in your shoes. He's a researcher. He is also a CEO of Fast Track Impact. Among other roles, he is the research lead for the UK Peatland program, where he sits on the executive board, and he is also co-chair of Global Peatland Initiative Research Working Group. Also, he's author of books on impact. So let's explore the impact topic and tools together. Mark, it's a pleasure to host you today. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much for such a generous introduction. As you were speaking, I put a few links into the chat, which you should be able to see and download the free course handbooks that come with today's session. You've got those as PDFs and as audiobooks where they are available as audiobooks. So enjoy in your own time. The goal of today's session, though, is to enable you to fast track your impact. Like you, I'm a busy academic. I've got lots of things on my plate. And if I'm going to actually make a difference with my research, I need the tools that will enable me to think strategically and act efficiently. And so today's workshop is a summation of a decade or two's research by me, but also the broader literature on what ultimately works when you want to achieve impact. If we can understand those generalizable principles and the time-saving tools, then we can achieve significantly more with our limited time. This is, as I'm alluding to, therefore evidence-based, based on my own research, but also the latest evidence. And you have today's course handbook, which is the Research Impact Handbook, but you can also dig into my subsequent two books on impact culture and on the productive researcher, a book which is primarily about work-life balance. And my new book is available for pre-order, which is focusing on influencing policy. And I've got a free training coming up on the 2nd of September. I'll maybe put that into the chat if I can find it easily, as I can multitask in the background. We shall see, but it's easy enough found. So yeah, evidence-based and hopefully experience-based as a fellow academic, trying to make this stuff actually realistic in the context of all the other pressures that you have. I'd like to start by getting to the heart of the concepts we're going to be exploring today through an icebreaker activity. So it's a bit of fun to start with, a way to get to know each other. But we're going to then use this as a metaphorical vehicle for this central concept. So a harder question coming in a moment. But for now, in a moment, I'm going to invite you to raise a foot to the camera or angle your camera or screen so we can see what you are wearing on your feet. So to do this, you need to make sure your camera is on, but of course, entirely voluntary. If you don't want to participate, that's up to you. Make sure that you're on gallery view so you can see everyone, not just me. And then once we've seen what everyone's wearing, we're going to head over to the chat and we're going to write whose shoes, socks, slippers, or whatever else we discover about each other you would like to swap places with. You don't have to remember the person's name, just describe their footwear, and we'll see if there's any winners. So that's the task. So make sure that you are on gallery view. If you can remove the spotlight, whoever's put that on, please, to make that possible. And yeah, so I've got some rather colourful socks on today. What have you guys got on? We have Gregor ready for a run. Tanya looking very summery, as is Simona. Tina's beating you both with bare feet, though. It's definitely warmer where you are. Nika. Okay, we have so many different types of sandals. This is impressive. I've never seen so many sandals in one room. Gregor, you have shoes that are ready for anything. Love that. The other Gregor. And in fact, both Gregors have shoes which are looking ready for anything. Leon, very nice. Yeah, I would like a pair like that as well. So, and is it Doman? Is that your first name? Yeah, great. Beautiful. Thank you. I love the sandals. In fact, pretty much everyone is wearing sandals. I don't know if this is just, yeah, it's just the time of year, but
31 degrees, 31 degrees.
31?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. It's definitely the time of year. So, whose sandals or shoes or bare feet would you like to swap places with? And I quite like the look of Leon's sandals. And I would definitely like it to be that warm. It's definitely not as warm here. It's warm-ish. So I'll go for Leon's sandals. Yeah, Doman's also looked pretty good, actually. Yeah. Gregor's perfectly happy. No need to swap. Anyone else have footwear jealousy? Nika's sandals. Excellent. Oh, I didn't see Vesna's. Great. Simona's nice. Yeah, they did look very smart. Great. I was quite tempted just to go barefoot though. Tina was, I was kind of between Leon sandals and Tina's, because just yeah, we're at home, and why not? Fantastic. So oh, there we go. Nika is also going for the barefoot option. But otherwise, I reckon, ooh, it's kind of hard. There's no clear winner by the looks of this. Gregor has a couple of votes, so 3 votes, in fact. So Gregor, I'm going to, in fact, which Gregor, I'm not sure. Both Gregors will give you both the prize, so well done. All right, that's a bit of fun, a way of getting to know each other. But a more serious and challenging question for you now. I want to build up through this exercise what I'm going to describe as a theory of impact. Essentially, what works when you want to achieve impact. If I follow this approach, then it's likely to work compared to just creating negative unintended consequences, wasting my time, etc. But crucially, I want you to use this exercise as a metaphor. So think about what we've just been doing, as we've looked at what each other are wearing and written in the chat. And then using that as a metaphor for your answer, I want you to describe, what is this concept, this approach, this theory of impact? What works? If I take this approach, if I follow this way, then this is likely to work. What's going on here? So in the chat again, and there are multiple right answers to this question, so please don't be shy. What are your thoughts? I'll give you some thinking time as well as some typing time. Okay, great. So Pia, instantly getting into this because we have to listen to people's feedback. So effectively, we're voting. What are the kind of things that are going to work for people out there? Let's actually test our ideas out, get some feedback, rather than going blind and then after the event realizing, yeah, that's kind of obvious. It was never going to work had I only done a bit of research, not only on my own topic, but on actually how this might land with people. Brilliant. Thanks, Gregor. Let's take an evidence-based approach to impact. So very similar, but just, yeah, tying that up very nicely. let's not just take our own evidence, but let's also take an evidence-based approach to how we engage with people. Vesna, thank you, a personal approach. So we're getting to know each other personally in ways that we didn't know each other before. And if we can reach out and have that personal touch to our engagement, then we're going to tailor this a little bit more, and it's more likely to work. Very good. Thanks, Tanya. What worked for others might work for me. And getting very close to the concept that I'm building on here is this idea that I'm putting myself in somebody else's shoes, and I'm wondering imaginatively, what might it be like to be them? And as a result, now I am able to do something that is much more likely to work. And so it is this idea, I'm putting it in the chat, of empathy, putting yourself in somebody else's sandals in this case today, where it is an act of imagination. And there's a heart to this as well, that I have to not just imagine, but feel what it might be like to be that person. A person who is in need, a person who might benefit from an opportunity like this. And now as I think about that scenario that they're in, I see their limitations. I see their skills. I see their context. And as a result now, I'm able to tailor what I'm doing and focus on perhaps just that one thing that would deeply resonate with someone like that, that would actually make a difference in the real world. And this is very different, I would suggest, to how we normally do impact. So we tend to build these ivory towers through our research projects. And at the end of them, we've got a bunch of great ideas, and we throw them out from the top of our ivory towers, and we hope for the best. But it's a kind of a scattergun process, and we're not really sure what's going to work because we're so far away from the people that we ultimately want to help. And of course, some of these things meet their mark, but a lot of them just go astray or land on top of people and squash them. We have negative unintended consequences. And so instead, let's not even build the ivory tower. And if we have, we climb down the stairs, we climb over a few fences, and we go into people's houses, we meet people where they are, understand who they are, what their needs are. And then together with them, we come up with the kinds of ideas that ultimately are going to help real people. And now I stop wasting my time on this scattergun approach with all these things that were never going to work. And I focus on that one approach, that one idea, that one thing that might really, really help. And so this becomes much, much more strategic. And of course, as I take this more personal approach, if I can describe this using Vesna's words, then I meet people who want to see the same kind of things that I want to see in the world, who perhaps have resources, have people who can help. And all of a sudden, this becomes a team effort. And it's not just me. Together, we can achieve way, way more. Someone just requested a AI summary of today's meeting. So that will record not only what I'm saying, but also all of your own answers. I'm going to be inviting you to come on mic soon. So can I just check if anyone has any objections to that? And if so, to write in the chat. And whoever requested it, please feel very free to request again, and I will accept as long as we don't have any objections. So thanks for that. Okay, so we're starting with a theory. This idea that an empathic approach is fundamentally what works. And you'll see the Research Impact Handbook coming back to this again and again, as the literature does, in different words very often, but ultimately it comes back to this much more personal, empathic approach that enables us to tailor what we're doing and act strategically. So if this is what works, if this is a theory of impact, then I wonder, could we start to build up a definition of impact? What would you describe? How would you describe impact? So again, in the chat, let's hear your thoughts. A definition of impact. What have we got? Okay, thanks, Gregor. So two aspects to this. Yaklika also suggesting this word change. And what I like about the word change is that we all get it. We understand what change is, what it means. Whereas impact, yeah, could be positive, could be negative, kind of implies some sort of blunt force injury. Yeah, it's a little bit vague. Change, we understand. The only reason I don't tend to use the word change is that, of course, change can be positive or negative, which is also the problem with the idea of impact. And actually, for us as researchers, at least, we are seeking positive change or beneficial change. So I'd always add some kind of qualifier to that. To give it this kind of normative angle that says, ultimately, we are trying to achieve good. And we are looking for the negative changes so that we can manage for them. But yeah, I love that as a word. Let me see. Yeah, Gregor also saying that this ideally should be measurable. And of course, it doesn't have to be, but this is a really nice thing to have because this is not just about reporting to funders or anyone else. This means that I can see whether or not this is actually working. And critically, that also tells me if it's not working. And if I don't have some way of getting feedback, then I could be doing all this supposedly great stuff, but actually having negative unintended consequences. So a really important addition. Thank you, Gregor. Other Gregor is saying adoption. And so ultimately what you're suggesting here is that there is some kind of behavior change. It's not just that we've put this idea out into the world. You've got, say, a new bit of kit, for example, but people are actually using that bit of kit. And I would say also, it's not just that they're necessarily adopting it, they're adopting it and it is leading to some kind of good, to use the word that Simona has put into the chat. Because there are lots of things that we have to adopt. For example, I don't know, IT systems, for example, that just actually make our lives harder and waste more time. So we adopted it, but actually it's just frustrating us, and maybe the change is not good. But I think, yeah, the key point is that this is not just we put something out into the world. We're looking for that adoption, that behavior change, and also then evidence that it does good. And again, this idea of influence is very similar to adoption, I think, that we are influencing people, but our hope is we are influencing people for good. And you just have to look at some of the lobbyists out there who are trying to influence policy for ill. For example, oil company lobbyists, for example, and of course, influence is not a neutral thing, and we're looking for positive influence. Of course, at this point, many of you are probably already beginning to think, yeah, this normative aspect that you're bringing in here, Mark, this is a bit uncomfortable because who defines what is good? And this suddenly becomes very subjective. So I'm going to give you a couple of definitions, and then I want to open up for some discussion and get people on mic sharing with us your insights or what's landing with you, or just in the chat, asking questions or reflecting on what these introductory exercises are doing for you. But before we do that, let's just have a look through the rest of the comments, because there are some beautiful things in here. Vesna, I love that idea, to touch someone inside. So this is, yeah, a change that goes deep. So it's not just, I'm going to do something differently tomorrow. This is a lasting habit. It's changed my heart as well as my mind. Nina, I think, yeah, it's nice to have something which is validated. So to go back to Gregor's point about measurable, but we are today thinking specifically about research impacts. And so this is the benefits that arise from research, and not the research itself. So we can measure our research kind of in terms of citations, in terms of career progression, all of those kinds of things. But here we're thinking specifically about the impact that arises from that. So yeah, let's validate that our research has indeed had impacts out there in the world, non-academic impacts. That's the focus. So learning is part of this. Thanks, Katya. Slavic making life better. That's great. Yep, so a few repeating ideas here, which are all fantastic. Yeah, so Pia, just making that point that I was saying again a bit more strongly, it has to go beyond the research a project to actually impact thinking or practice outside academia. Very nicely put, Leon. The collision of ideas and the birth of new ones. And of course, that can happen just in the research domain. And at this point, we're not talking about non-academic impact. That key academic breakthrough, that could also be described by this. But when that collision of ideas happens outside the academy and gives birth to ideas that actually help people and do good, that's when this would be impact. And so, yeah, Ziga saying, having an effect, good or bad, this is a nice segue into my definitions, because this is where it starts to get difficult. Who can determine this? Well, science can't determine what is good or bad, but people can. And for me, this is a bit like that kind of philosophy of science idea that we have data, and when that data is transformed into information, there is meaning that is derived from that data. When that information then is learned by someone, it turns into knowledge. And when that knowledge is used for good, we have wisdom. But of course, that is a value judgment. And what one person will say is a good use of knowledge, another person may say that is bad, at least for me. And we can think of lots of examples where an impact is good for one group, but bad for another, or good for one group in one time and one context, and bad for that same group in a changed context or at a later date. So here are my definitions, and I'm going to start with a one-word definition that, for me, simplifies everything. You know, the clouds part, and at this point, I'm like, right, okay, that's what this is. Simple. In a word, impact is benefit. And of course, we've got this normative aspect built in, which I'm going to unpack. But when I do a find and replace in my mind, I take out the word impact, I put back in the word benefit. Instantly, this becomes a lot clearer. Where I'm achieving actual benefits out there in the real world, those are my impacts. And if I'm doing research and I can't see any benefits for anyone yet, other than my team, my discipline, my institution, I don't have impact yet. I need to keep going. Or maybe I just need to go and ask the question, who out there has actually benefited? And maybe there is impact. I just haven't been curious enough yet to find out. But of course, it is in this act of asking who has benefited that it becomes very clear that this is a highly subjective concept. So like Simona, I've used the word good in my own definition in the Research Impact Handbook. It is the good that we as researchers do out there in the world beyond academia. And this is the first peer-reviewed cross-disciplinary definition of impact. I'll put this into the chat. Let's see. And in this, I have paired the word demonstrable that you may be familiar with from funder definitions and official definitions of impact with this other word, perceptible. And it is this idea of, well, demonstrable to whom? Against what set of criteria? Against whose values? Those questions really matter. And if we now understand the role of perception in this, we understand that this is inherently subjective. And I need to ask the people that I ultimately want to help how this is landing for them, and ultimately what they want to see. And they ultimately need to be the judge of whether or not I have achieved impact. So I'm just realizing while I have my internet browser open, this is the link to that influencing policy free training on the 2nd of September. So I'm sticking that in the chat as well. So what we've got is two definitions here, and I want to test you out on these now. So I'm going to give you a multiple choice question, and we'll see how you get on. Can you deploy this definition to work out which of these things are impact in a moment? And then we'll in fact, no, you know what? I said I would break for conversation now, actually. So let's do that. And then I'll test you, and then we'll break for some more conversation. So I'd love to hear some voices. If you want to raise a hand, and to raise the hand, that is under the React tab at the bottom of the screen, and then you'll see raise hand at the bottom of all those different options. You can write in the chat, of course. Any questions at this point? Let's write that in. But
there
also
is a question from Giga, from Professor Turk in the chat.
Okay. Reflections, questions, actions. And wonderful, thanks, Ziga. Isn't finding truth, which science is about, beneficial in itself, regardless of what it can in the short term do to individuals or groups? Yeah, so this is a very common question, a very common issue. And I want to really validate what you're saying here. Ziga, can I just check? Ziga is your first name. Are you happy for me to?
Close enough.
Sorry?
Close enough. It's close enough. It's Giga, but Giga is close enough.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. And I'm going to come back to you just for some reflections on what I say. So for me, it is critical that we continue to value knowledge for knowledge's sake, whether or not it has an application or it can do good yet. I believe that we are poorer as a world if we only value the knowledge that can easily and in the short to medium term have an obvious impact. And I would argue that if that is all we value, then we should be employing consultants to do the research that we do. They can often deliver the kind of answers people want a lot quicker and for a lot less money. What we have as a unique value proposition as academics is a foundation that is built on decades, on centuries of inquiry, on theory that understands more deeply than anyone else can understand, that enables us to come up with ideas. And some of those ideas are actually solutions that nobody else would be able to come up with. And in some cases, there are long delays between the generation of that knowledge and its eventual impact. And so I believe very strongly that we need to protect that funding, and it is under threat in most countries that I work in. And we need to value that. And for me, I do my theoretical kind of work, which doesn't have impact, and I do my impactful work. And both of them meet different needs in me and in the world, I would argue. So yeah, absolutely valid and important. And yes. Can I get any other thoughts or reflections from you on this, Sika?
Well, I would be actually inclined to argue that the consultants are actually able to address pressing and short-term issues much more efficiently than science, who is, as you said, building on centuries of tradition, centuries of experience, centuries of knowledge. I would say a little bit more objective and disinterested in the current fashionable issues around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And maybe I can just kind of divide this into three categories. We have that fundamental research that may take many years to achieve impact, if it ever does. We have the applied research, which still takes years to complete and to generate impact, but that is the bread and butter of many of the most impactful researchers I know. And then we have the consultants who do the more short-term stuff. And by making both our fundamental and our applied research as accessible and understandable as possible, then we increase the likelihood that those consultants and others who are advising policy, business, and the like to pick that up. And what I often do is I will come in as an academic advisor on consultancy projects. I'll charge 1 or 2 days of my time in order to give them that access to that deep knowledge base that the consultancy team just don't have. So we can potentially, as researchers, engage in all three of those domains. Any other responses to this? I've got something in the chat. Yeah, great. Thanks, Siga. So responses to this conversation or anything else that's arisen as you've been listening? Just give you time to think and raise a hand under the React tab. But if you feel more comfortable, just type. Okay. So far, hopefully, so simple. Hopefully we're going to unpack some of the complexity of this by trying to apply this now to some different domains. And then we're going to discuss this together. And if there's not much in the way of plenary discussion, I'll just break everyone into small groups or pairs for that discussion. So we'll just see how that goes. But first of all, I want to get you to vote. So whichever of these works for you, the idea of impact as a good or impact as a benefit, take that definition and deploy this now to these different domains. And I want you to tell me which of these is, by definition, if you accept this definition of impact, not an impact. And the confusing thing is that if you look at the peer-reviewed literature, you will see all of these claimed as impacts. So I'm taking issue with this. And of course, you can take issue with me and my definition, and that's the point of the discussion. But I'm going to suggest that by definition, if you get this, the definition that I'm giving you here, you'll be able to spot which of these is not an impact. So you can vote at any point, and I'm going to just run through these. Let's see, here we go. I'll run through these. So if it helps, I'll give you a few clues as we go. And actually, another big clue before I start this is the issue is this is not an impact yet. So is it the idea of, the idea of an economic impact? So I have made money, I have saved money as a result of this research. Is it an environmental impact? We have protected the environment, we've made it better, enhanced it in some way, perhaps reduced marine plastic pollution. I don't know. We got a social impact. So this could be at the scale of society, of a specific social unit. It could be social policy, for example, or closing an attainment gap between boys and girls or a particular subject in school. Is it a technological impact? I've got a new technology and innovation. I've patented that technology. Is it a health and well-being impact? I made people healthier. I've protected people from ill health or harm. Which of these is it? And if you like, you can expand on your answer. I'm going to invite people to speak to this if they wish and to ask questions in a moment. And if you can't get the poll to work for any reason, give me your answer in the chat as well. So just over half of you have voted. I'm going to hurry you along and give you 3 seconds to think about this. And we'll finish it there. Okay, fantastic. So we've got a tie between technological and economic, and I love this. So I think that there are arguments for both economic and technological. Let's see, Polona has given the answer to why technology is by definition not an impact. And this is the clearer of the two. So the issue is that impact, it's a bit like engagement. So I've done all this great engagement, but how do I know it's actually benefited anyone? Perhaps it was just a whole load of noise. And great, we've got a technology. But maybe it's just a prototype sitting on a shelf, a patent application. And of course, the fact that it was patented was a red herring. It is not any evidence of impact. That just simply says it's original. So great. I've got a technology. I've maybe even made this technology. Maybe I've put it into people's hands and it actually doesn't work, or it leads to disastrous, negative, unintended consequences. And so there's the first issue of, well, a technology in and of itself isn't necessarily beneficial. But of course, the technology could cause more harm than good. And we can probably all think of technologies that have been used to kill, maim, and destroy. So great. It's the means and not the end. And that's just, oh, I'm not sharing the results. There we are. Let's have a think about public engagement. A lot of people spend loads of time doing schools work, doing science fairs, whatever it might be, and it's a whole lot of fun, and we think we're doing good, but actually, are we? Maybe we're boring people senseless. Maybe we're speaking so much jargon nobody understands anything we're doing. Maybe we're just wasting everyone's time. I meet people who tell me they've got policy impact because they've appeared in inquiries, they've given verbal evidence to committees, they've written policy briefs. Great, there are people listening, but do any of them understand what we're saying? Have they actually now done anything in policy that actually is good? Have those policies been implemented and actually done good in the world? And again, maybe it's just a whole load of hot air. I don't know. And the key thing that I want you to all understand in this exercise is the distinction between the means and the end. And a lot of people spend their entire careers on the means, doing great public engagement, great policy engagement, business engagement, creating technologies, thinking they're having an impact. But there's no evidence that anyone has ever benefited one bit from that work. And you just need to push that a bit further, or be a bit more curious about how this is working to ensure that we have reached that end, that at least one person has benefited in some shape or form. So economic is arguable. I wonder, someone who voted economic, tell me why. Because I think you can make an argument both ways for this one. Before you do, actually, just have a look. Leon's saying technology is a field of possibilities that creates or offers the conditions for certain impact. Leon, I love your turn of phrase. Amazing. Yeah, put very, very nicely. And in fact, before we move to economic, Dunya is saying tech is the most important. And let's just get a different perspective here, because as I said, there's plenty of people in the peer-reviewed literature saying technology equals impact. So let's get a different perspective before we move on to economic impacts. Anyone want to put that case? Okay, yeah, it's a nice answer to what's coming next, Nika, thank you. But for now, yeah, and Zika also saying, yeah, why does that not count as a benefit? So I've improved the technology. Yeah, so we've got a technology that is working, it's okay. But it is not as efficient or as effective as we would like it to be. And so we now come up with this new innovation that makes this technology twice as efficient. We're saving money, we're saving energy, and we think it is pretty much just as effective, maybe a little bit more based on some trials that we've done. And we put this into the real world, and it turns out that at scale, this is, yes, more efficient and it's saving people money and time, but actually the outcomes are worse. And if this is in the medical domain, perhaps people are dying as a result of our supposed improvement. So great, we think we've got something which is an improvement, but I need to actually check that this is genuinely working in the real world and that there are actually benefits, because my supposed improvements might only be benefiting the shareholders of my company and nobody else. And of course, we'll then discuss whether or not that is a benefit. And I think that often depends on your politics and your values more than anything else. So great. I've got a new technology, I've got a better technology, but for whom is that better? Well, often it depends. And unless I can prove that this is actually, on balance, a good thing, and it actually works, then, yeah, my new technology is just a new technology. It's not an impact until I can prove there's a benefit from it. So we have to look at the outcome of that technology and analyze that and make that value judgment before we can classify that as impact. Yeah, you're right, Dunya, they do go hand in hand. Any other thoughts on, yeah, so Zika, I'm an engineer. Without technology, you don't get any good in other areas. And yeah, I'd say the same thing goes for policy impacts in particular. Without good engagement, you're not going to get policy impact. Just putting my paper out there is not going to make a difference. So that means is critical. You're absolutely right. We need good technology. We need good engagement, high quality, high integrity engagement. Technology, all of those means need to be right. And we're going to have to think about that in a moment. That's what we're moving on to next. But the key thing is that we don't get so focused on the means that we forget the end. So great technologies, but let's keep checking and monitoring and evaluating. Do these technologies actually deliver what we want, what we expect? And if not, we're adapting them and changing them. Same with our engagement. So yes, absolutely, it's important. But the key thing is that we don't just get stuck doing that we keep our eye on that end point. So yeah, anyone else want to comment on technology? Especially if you disagree with me or have questions. In that case, let's move on to onto the economic question, and slightly uncomfortable conversation to have. So Nina, I wonder if I could ask you to, or Nina or Polona, actually, either of you, whoever feels that they'd like to speak, just to expand on this. And implicit in what you're saying in your answers are a set of values. And of course, not all of us will share those values. And so a lot of people would argue, and I'm going to put the opposing view before you speak. A lot of people would argue that that money is a good thing. If we measure economic progress by measures like GDP, then more is better. And there are lots of examples where you can argue that, say, a medical technology that actually saves lives, that is also cheaper to a national health service, is saving the government money, therefore saving taxpayers money, making money for that medical technology company, and at the same time saving lives. And so I think we can think of examples where those economic impacts are good. But most of those examples are where there are also other benefits, not just economic impacts, at least based on my own values. So let's get a sense of where you're coming from, if that's okay, Polona or Nika. Why would you contest an economic impact as being a good thing in and of itself?
I was kind of making an argument for the sake of making an argument I don't necessarily agree with, but I don't share this view necessarily, but I can see how somebody could make this argument. And I think the argument has to do mostly with I don't know how to phrase it correctly, but maybe disproportionate benefit, like that perhaps you as, let's say somebody who created this great technology or something can profit disproportionately from it, and then perhaps this same profit that you've created can create a loss for some people, or not create the same amount of so I think that this is at the core of it. This disproportionality is why I think some people take issue with it.
Yeah, yes, beautifully put. Thank you, Polona. And feel free to speak or to write in the chat. And can I remind you, you can write in the chat anonymously at any point. Just drop down from everyone to my name. I will then read your comment, but I won't say who you are. Because ultimately what I'm asking you to do this is to engage your values. Yes, sorry, did someone else want to speak?
You asked for my reply, so I just
Thanks, Nika.
Yes. So, yes, I think economy is the same thing as technology. It's just a means to an end. So it's not good per se. And currently, I think we just have a problem with measuring economic success. And we have arguments that GDP, the rise of GDP is the same as devastation of the environment and GDP. So it's a question of how you measure really economic success. And it's, we are at a transition point. So economic success is not necessarily something good. It can be the same as technology. So we have to evaluate on the basis of values that we have. This is what you're saying as well. So it can be good. We can get rid of economy, obviously, but how do we do it? That's another question.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it's pro or against, but it's, in the name of economy, there have been many wars that started, many ecological disasters, many problematic policies being put in place. But at the same time, if you don't have the economy, of course, you cannot fund positive programs as well. Our healthcare depends on economy, education. So the public good actually depends on economic systems that we have currently in place. So
exactly, yeah. So it depends, doesn't it? A war will have a positive impact on the GDP of a country that is supplying arms to that war. And yet we would argue that is probably not a great thing. But spending economic progress in the areas of health, education, environment, for example, perhaps that's what we should be measuring if we want to use an economic measure of good in the world. Essentially, what I'm asking you all to do at this point is to engage with your values and to start asking what is good, what is beneficial, both from the perspective of those you seek to help and from your own perspective. And this is quite uncomfortable for some of us. And I'm going to suggest it's something which is subconscious, especially for those of us who are more objectivist in the way that we do our science. Well, of course, I am neutral, I'm independent, but actually I do have values. And I want to illustrate this with a story of an engineer that I met in a London university who came to me with this technology at the end of a talk that I gave. And he said to me, I want your advice. I'm trying to work out what I should do with this technology. And I've got two choices. I could sell this into the National Health Service, where it could save millions of lives. But equally, I could actually sell this to an arms manufacturer, and that could potentially make lots of money. And so I asked him, well, ultimately, what are your values? What do you care most deeply about? And he reflected for a very short amount of time and said, well, I'm getting near to retirement. I want to retire having spun out a company that makes a minimum of £2 million. That's what I'm looking for. More would be good. And instantly I was like, well, it looks like you've got your answer, haven't you? And he went away happy. And presumably he sold his new technology, whatever it was, to the arms manufacturer. And no judgment. That is his values. That is him following his heart. And that might be challenging to not judge that, perhaps. I don't know what your values are. But I think it's important that none of us judge anyone else in terms of where we take this. But what we do need to do is to judge our own hearts and start to ask those deeper questions. So a few of us in the chat, so maybe an easier place to talk about some of these issues, but do feel free to raise a hand as I'm running through this, and then we'll move on and start thinking about some practical tools before we take our break. So yeah, we are taking a break in about half an hour, just so you're aware of that. Sorry, I didn't say at the beginning. The Pia is talking here about justice, ultimately, about who benefits, why, and how. And I believe this is a question that we as researchers need to ask, because if we do our research, put it out there, and leave it to others to generate impact from this work, then who knows how it will be used. And we can't often stop that from happening, but we can take some control over this and start to proactively push the kind of benefits that we think would be good for the kinds of people that we want to benefit. Leon, we have to take a step back and evaluate what good economy is, and then we can go even further back to see if the concept of economy in itself is good, all the way back to the paradigm. I think that the one thing our society does not talk enough about is paradigm. There is little or no dialogue about this. And when we're blind to that, we are simply feeding the dominant, in this case, economic paradigm. With or without our consent or even our conscious awareness. And so the deeper we become aware of these paradigms in society and how they intersect with our values, the more critically we can think about whether or not we feed paradigms that we agree with or actually fundamentally would like to dismantle or undermine. Really nice. So we've gone deep with this. Any final thoughts or questions before we get practical before the break? Yes, great. Over to you.
I was just typing, and now I wouldn't have time enough. So
okay,
I only agree that we should be respectful to the others and work on ourselves to be deeper in touch with ourselves. But on the other hand, not to be judgmental. I have some boundaries. If somebody evidently is harmed by something I give into the world, I would not support that. I wouldn't say, I would discuss if I'm being judgmental or not, but, if something really harmed somebody's life or something like that, I would not be respectful. I would work with respect, but wouldn't agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really nice. And I think there are different responses we can take. We can ignore and just hide and not even look to see. We just put our work out and hope for the best. But when we do notice things are going wrong, I was suggesting perhaps we oppose, we undermine, we try and tackle those who we believe may be misusing our research head on. But equally, we can take a much more respectful approach to say, yeah, but they simply have a different set of values to me. And who am I to judge? I will pursue the values I have and try and do what I believe is good for this. But equally, if someone else wants to do something else with this, then that's up to them. And I will still respect them and work respectfully with them rather than antagonizing and going to war effectively. And of course, part of that then is also about what you are willing to do and the risks you're willing to take in terms of whether, yeah, I might want to go to war with someone like that, but actually I care more about my own mental health and protecting my own children from what might happen. And that is a decision I have made at certain times when I know the people that I would be going up with have a reputation for fighting dirty. And some of us are robust enough to go into battles like that. Others are not, and we have to make our own decisions about what we are actually capable of doing, as well as our values. So thanks, Ziga. Speaking of benefits, do we researchers know better what is beneficial than the average person who judges that something is beneficial? And this is a question that is actually at the heart of my next book. This cozy elite, effectively, that exists with researchers who are an elite within society influencing policy, that we think we're doing the right thing. But unless we are actually in touch with people on the ground, and ideally representing their views or even bringing them into the corridors of power and giving them a voice, how do I actually know that this is not just one elite influencing another, potentially to the detriment of the average person? So yeah, this is exactly the question we should all be asking. Love that. Another question from Gregor, the challenge of confirmation bias, the predefined impacts as set in the project application form can lead our research in the direction towards proving these impacts at all costs. using creative methodologies to identify, assess, and demonstrate the non-existing impacts. Is that bad science? I would say, yeah, absolutely. But this is, what the EU in theory wants. My experience of funders, I've worked across multiple framework programs. Currently got a couple of projects in the Horizon Europe. Is that, there are certain normative goals that the Commission want to see, and we're pursuing them. And the ones that I struggle most with often are those kind of economic progress type goals. But at the same time, there is nothing to stop you going above and beyond, going deeper than just the things that they are looking for. And ultimately, when it comes to the impact side of things, they want to see good done in the world, and there is a degree of flexibility. When you get your reviewers and you stand in front of that panel and you explain, look, the world has changed. This policy is no longer relevant given what's just happened. Therefore, we have switched and we are no longer pursuing a policy like that. We're pursuing something very different. In my experience, these are rational human beings who look. These are other scientists on that panel, typically, who look and they say, yes, of course, it would be a complete waste of money and senseless to be pursuing this impact doggedly when, in fact, the world has changed and this is no longer needed. This is no longer beneficial. And so my experience is that that panels are more understanding, more flexible than we often think. And I would focus on what is right and worry about what the panel says later based on my experience. But that may be easy for me to say, having been to a bunch of these kind of panel assessments and reviews and seen generally how reasonable people are around that. In terms of the deliverables, and you get some people who are just anal. In terms of the science or whatever it is, that sometimes is a bit more of a challenge. But where there's a clear indication that the world has changed and this impact is no longer relevant or could be harmful, then you can make that case, and it is usually heard and responded to. So I would adapt as you go, and avoid that bias where you can. I wonder, do you want to respond to this, Gregor, and anyone else with different experience want to just balance what I'm saying if you think what I'm saying is inadvisable?
No, I just want to thank you for your answer, and I think it goes, I mean, it is in line with what I think, and sometimes you just need to be a bit, how to say, like you have to try. You win it or you lose it. So it's better than just, doing something you don't really believe in. Thank you.
And that point of doing something we believe in, I'll just conclude with this, because what we've done is we have created a foundation here. We have a theoretical foundation. We have a definitional foundation. And what we are just been creating now is an ethical foundation for our impact. And when we do things that we don't ultimately believe in, there ends up being often negative unintended consequences. And we lose our own motivation. And as a result, we give up on impacts. We don't go the extra mile. When things get difficult, we give up. And as a result, people feel kind of used. So connecting both our minds as we think about this theory and definition, and now our hearts with this, is essential if we are actually going to invest the time and the energy necessary to achieve impact. And that's not necessarily about spending more time. It's about being committed deeply to that one thing you're going to achieve as efficiently as possible, because we're going to take a really strategic approach now. Fantastic. So let's move to tools at this point. We need to get practical, and that's exactly what we're going to do. I've got an exercise for you to do individually and to discuss as a pair. So that's coming up. So hopefully everyone is back in time to be moving into your paired discussion. What we're going to start with is a tool that will help you to analyze who is most relevant for you to engage with, that will give you the intelligence then to engage effectively with them. Traditionally, this is a tool known as stakeholder analysis. I'm calling this a 3I analysis instead. If you want to know why I'm avoiding that word stakeholder, then have a look at my most recent article in the journal Sustainability Science. I call it 3Is after 3 words beginning with the letter I, which are the 3 criteria you use in this analysis. And I want you to start by asking who might be interested in your research beyond the academy for any reason. There's an or not, I'll come back to the or nots. Of those people, what kind of influence that might they have to enable us to achieve impact? But we also need to think about this in the negative form, because there are some groups that actually have influence to block us from achieving impact. In fact, they may even want to block our research if what we are doing is controversial. But we need to know who those groups are and have some information about them if we are to manage for whatever they might do. And then finally, who is impacted directly by this, either positively or negatively? Is it these groups, or do other groups come to mind at this point? And then I think about what they're interested in, how influential they might be. And again, we're making sure we think about this in both its positive and negative form. We could have people who are impacted in a way which delivers them benefits, but this could also be harmful. And it's really important that we do that kind of thinking as well. And so in your small groups, in your pairs, I'm going to simply invite you to choose one organization, and it works best in the exercise with an organization, but this could be just a group, say farmers, for example, when you go to this in your own time. But in this case, I would choose, say, the National Farmers Union. So I've got something quite defined. And I want you to then discuss with your colleague the level of interest, influence, and impact that your research might have for a group like that. That's the goal. I'm more interested in quality than quantity. So if only one of you has an organization that comes to mind, that's fine. Spend your time working through that together. And the other person's task is to be asking questions, and in particular that why question, to get you to go as deep as possible. And we'll see what comes out of this exercise. That's the goal. We're just going to use these 3 words to guide a conversation. That's the idea. I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to start thinking, come up with an organization in your mind and just start having a think about what the answers to these questions might be. But I'm going to encourage you to actually get the answers through discussion. That's the way this is going to work. And I'm also going to put into the chat for you this template that you can use in your own time. If you want, you can have this up on screen. There's a few prompts that might help, but don't bother writing in. I want you to focus on actually discussing with each other. And so that is in the chat, and instructions on how to make that your own in your own Google Sheets. And we've got another tool which we'll look at briefly before the break, also linked there. You can see there's a little tab at the bottom, and as I click through, I can see a worked example. This is from my own research. That might also be helpful. But essentially, it is these 3 questions: interest, influence, and impact in the chat. So you'll have that when you go to your breakout rooms. And I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to start reflecting on this. If you're wondering, what is this again? Click on that link, that first link. Start thinking through this with one organization in mind, and I'll set up the rooms. Those of you in professional services, do let me know if I get 2 people in professional services paired together, and I'll mix things up. In that case, it's usually easiest for you to work with the researcher, asking them questions. Don't be too shy. Just say, yeah, I've got an organization I know something about, dive in. If you have time, great, both take turns. But I'm going to give you 10 minutes for this exercise. That's all it should take. Start looking at the time, I'm going to give you 8 minutes, but that is ample time for this. But all I'm looking for is one of you to look at one organization and work through these 3 questions. That's the goal. And see how you get on, and we'll see how that goes when you come back. So your rooms are open now, and that's 8 minutes. You've got a 2-minute warning and then a 1-minute countdown. I'm going to start the time yet. There's a few people who haven't gone. If you've not yet gone to your room, let me know if you're having technical problems.
Hello, Mark. Me and Leon were put together and we are both in KTO, so could you
Okay, no worries. Let's see, so I'm going to give you Nina, Leon. So that's room 13. Great, and then Tanya, I will put you with Nika.
This one part started. Okay. Hi, Mark. So we were again put together with Leon, and we work actually in the same department. That's knowledge transfer. So we both agree that the university is an organization, but maybe it would be more beneficial if you could pair us with someone?
I think our time is going to be up. So
Yeah, okay.
let's
No worries. But the one good thing is that we agreed without even thinking about it.
Exactly.
You know?
So yeah, you want to have an impact on the university. What are the things that the university specifically is interested in? And now you need to start thinking about senior leaders, senior managers. And so you've got things you want to achieve, but actually you need to get into their heads. What are their interests?
Exactly.
Which are very often quite economic in nature.
Yeah.
And of course, then what is the influence? Actually, now I'm beginning to fine grain which group. Are there particular individuals in terms of the domains I'm working on that I need to be thinking about? And then what are the benefits for them as individuals, as well as the impacts and the benefits for the university? That means that now I'm approaching the right person from the right committee with a pitch that actually benefits them as much as it does the university. And now we're talking. Do you get the idea?
Well, that's basically you were actually describing the technology transfer office's core business. You know?
Exactly.
Great.
And it's our task actually to transfer newest technology, or whichever research results we're talking about, into society or onto the market, so that the university becomes more influential within its natural habitat, so to speak, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm just multitasking here to get a timer going. So that is not doing what I wanted it to. There we are. Yeah, so I guess it's fine graining then, and I wonder, as you think through these questions, is this giving you any new ideas in terms of how you do business as an office?
Maybe not just yet. It needs to settle down a bit in our heads, because especially in humanities and social sciences, we are really at the very beginning of tackling these issues in knowledge transfer. So this is a great session today for us to just really open our minds into how we can do this business.
Right.
Again, absolutely agree.
Yeah.
No, but it's exactly what Nina said. You know, it's very interesting that even in our last project for the technology transfer financing that ended like 2 years ago, I think. Well, the conclusion is that we are still in the time of creating an environment where all of these questions are starting to be relevant for researchers, you know, and how to actually make researchers think about the commercialization, of course, of knowledge, but also the impact that their knowledge has. So yeah, we're still there.
But then if the group is researchers, then again, can we use this to fine grain? So are there particular influencers within the research community that we might work with first? Might we think about this in terms of early career researchers as the next generation, and to start fine graining where you're targeting and then how based on their interests? Okay, that's everyone back. Fantastic. So how did you get on with that as an exercise? Any reflections? Did you like it? Did you find it challenging? Any questions arising from it? Any actions even? Quite often people realize, oh, actually now I've got a plan. Now that I've started thinking in this way, I need to go and change how I'm interacting with this organization. I need to make a new plan. So yeah, what kind of ideas, reflections, questions, actions are emerging for you? Over to you. You can raise a hand or write in the chat.
Maybe I can start.
Please,
So my speaking partner, she had quite some experiences in reaching out to organizations that would be the best beneficiaries of her research, and she gained interest. And they are also speaking, and she is also speaking on how to implement in one, really in deep discussions how to implement the research, and then into further organizations, the different types of organizations. So from my point of view, is how she always gets a positive impact, also answer. So that is perfect. But then what happens when researcher has the answer no? So how to encourage researcher when he gets no to still kick further and try to reach the final organization?
Yeah, fascinating. I think the thing that instantly comes out of your partner's story is that she? I think she, wonderful. Helena, you had to make this relevant. You had to get people interested, and not everyone is interested. And so what do we do in that scenario? And Helena, do you want to tell us what you have done when you found people who were not interested? How have you dealt with that?
A lot of people were interesting to collaborate, but yes, I didn't have an experience with organization who didn't want to collaborate. So
that's useful.
With a specific person, yes, but not with all organizations. So yeah. But then I just leave them alone. I'm working on expressive writing and how the writing can impact on your self-care or something.
Yeah.
And if a person isn't interested, then I leave them alone. So yeah, I will find someone else to work with. Yeah. But if we're talking about the big organization, they all see benefit in this process. So for now.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Fantastic. Thank you. The idea behind this tool is that if I understand the people that I'm trying to help deeply enough, then I'm going to be able to frame this in a way that the answer will always be, yes, of course, that's helpful, that's beneficial. Let's just get everyone muted for a moment. And ultimately, if you've done that work and someone is genuinely not interested, then you might want to assume that, yeah, this is just not relevant for them, in which case, leave them alone. However, sometimes you come across a person or an organization where all of the evidence points that they desperately need this, and yet they can't see that they need this. And those are the scenarios where perhaps you do need to then push a bit. But rather than pushing, kicking, for me, the response I like to have is more reflective, to say, okay, that's interesting. Why are you not interested? Given that you so clearly need this, what's going on? And then I start to dig deeper and realize, yeah, culture, yeah, prior experience, bias, prejudice, who knows? And now I can come back, having done that work, and frame this in a way that instantly, yeah, I get this. And yes, now I can engage with this. And that means that we're able, essentially, to take this empathic approach. And this is why this is the first and the most important tool in our toolkit. The first thing you need to do if you want to achieve impact is you do this 3I analysis, because this now enables you to take that empathic approach. This is not a one-size-fits-all. I'm going to have to frame this differently. I'm going to have to engage differently with different organizations, different groups. And if I don't, then this could end up landing really badly and having negative unintended consequences. And I'm going to get a lot of resistance for good reason, because I just didn't understand the context. So it's a critical first step. And in theory, this is what enables everyone to say yes, because we did that work. Other reactions, reflections? Good time for one more, if I may, and then we'll just conclude before the break with one final tool briefly.
I can talk about my case. I worked with Nika, and her project actually I feel that I am one of the groups or people that her projects deals with. So I want to know more. I'm happy she told me about it. I want to be involved when she will be working on it, because I really care about the result. And I hope she will count me in and tell me when those activities will be happening, because I really am interested.
Brilliant. Tanya, remind me the name of your partner again?
Nika Grab.
So Nika, I wonder, hearing Tanya's response to this and that enthusiasm, did that inform you a bit more in terms of, that's the bit you've latched onto, that's what you're interested in, perhaps that's going to inform how you engage with others? I don't know, what did you take from this, Nika?
Oh, it's definitely good to hear positive response. I just, the problem I have with these projects is usually the non-responsive environment of forms, which is very much a downturn for me, and that's why I don't do projects. And she's also very skillful with projects and stuff like that. So staff that deals with projects and their kind of engagement and enthusiasm and like finding ways is very, very supportive. It's very good to hear that, because also they help you navigate the field. But she's also engaged because she lives in the area. And I'm an architect, and I deal with like cultural heritage and specific sites. So I'm thinking about a project that is connected to a specific public space, and she lives close by. So she's like a part of the community, and at the same time she's in this project environment. And so I do hope that we get to develop this project further. And I'm just not very good at skillful with this project. You know, it's so we have a lot of work to do as teachers, and this research environment is increasingly demanding. So this kind of knowledge that there is help out there is great, but there is a limited amount of time that we can invest in training and writing and like doing the research and all that. So, let's see. So, but yes, it is empowering. Good to hear. Thank you for doing this, you know, because otherwise these forms are not for everyone, not for me.
Yeah, totally. And I think that what's really powerful, and I want to conclude with this point here, is that by getting that feedback from Tanya, now there's a sense of that lived reality of people like her who live there, that can enable you to get into the minds and the hearts of other people like Tanya, that helps you to communicate even more effectively with them. Now you've talked to Tanya, maybe she talks to her friends and her neighbors. And so this empathic connection builds, informs you, and enables you then to connect more effectively and to tailor what you do to people like Tanya. So this enables you to think much more clearly and start to guide your engagement process. I said that I'd come back to the or not very briefly. Of course, you can misuse a tool like this to only work with those who are most interested, most influential, who have most benefit from this. And it's important to also consider whether you might use a tool like this to identify those people who are not really that interested yet. You have to make this relevant to them. By definition, they have no influence. They are, in fact, the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. And yet they, of all people, may be more impacted, either positively or negatively. And so it is your moral duty to reach out to them and to understand how you can connect with and help people like that as well. I said I'd conclude briefly with the second of the two links, which is an impact planning tool. We're not going to dwell on this because your first step is to go and complete that 3I analysis first. Only once you've done that, then can you move into impact planning. And I'd encourage you, once you've completed that, to reach out to 2 or 3 individuals from the organizations that you've identified and have some conversations with them. And again, you're taking that step even deeper into their shoes. And now, based on those conversations, you can make a plan that will work. And you can maybe even use this tool in a workshop with some of these people to jointly plan for impact. So more in your book, more in my peer review literature, and again, a worked example if you go to and click on the tab in the second link I put into the chat. And essentially what we're doing now is we're starting with the impact goal. It's driven by that. This is a logic model, so very logical. And now if that's my goal, who is relevant? That is what comes from our 3I analysis. Based on our what we've learned from that analysis and maybe a few conversations, we're able to come up with much better impact goals that are much more likely to deliver for people like that. Now we have a sense of the kind of activities that will work. And as you can see, I'm going to use very different activities to work with an investment banker versus a tenant farmer, for example. We tailor our activities, and the more engagement we have with these people, the more likely we are to get this right. We ask those people, not us, what impact would look like. What would success look like? And now I've got measurable things that help me come up with better goals, but also help me track progress and see if I'm on track or off track. I talk to people and I get a sense of what the risks are, what could go wrong. And again, they are much more likely to be able to identify risks effectively than me and help me come up with ways of mitigating those risks. And I use this to then organize my impact and make a plan. And as you can see from this worked example, this is something that I've co-produced with people in the third sector and policy. And yes, I'm playing a role, but this, as I suggested at the beginning, is now a team-based approach. So it's not just me with my limited time. It's me and a bunch of other people out there who want to see the same change as me. And now together we can achieve way, way more than we could achieve alone. And we have a plan that is tailored to the needs and interests, limitations, constraints of the people that will benefit most. And I can be laser focused on that one goal with what limited time I have, with help from my friends. This becomes more fun and more efficient and more effective. So we're going to take a break at this point. It's a 25-minute break, so we will come back at 5 past the hour. When we come back, we're going to be thinking about how to apply all that we've learned in this morning's session in the context of writing better funding bids. We'll look at these two tools and we'll repurpose these as bid writing tools. You had the proposals to have a look at before, and for those who did this in advance, you probably were able to look at both of them. If you didn't do this in advance, you have time to have a look, just have a look at one, choose one of them randomly. So you do actually get a break and just scan through this. The question, as I put it into the agenda previously, was just how do you like how they integrated impact? Was this good or not? What did you like or dislike? I think there are pros and cons to both. They are both successful applications of projects that were funded, and I have the feedback on the impact section for one of them that we know scored 5 out of 5. But be critical. There are definitely things that could be done a lot better. So we'll be discussing that in small groups, larger than last time after the break. In the first session, we have thought about what impact is, what works. And I've introduced you to some time-saving tools that enable you to enact this theory of impact, this empathic approach. What I want to do now is to have a think about how you can apply all of this in the context of writing a successful research bid when it comes to the impact elements of this. So, of course, there are many aspects to a successful funding proposal, and I will talk more broadly than just impact. In fact, the first part is looking at some key tips that can help you to increase your funding success rate. But we will then think very specifically about the impact elements. We've got a breakout room session based on what you've read, and you will get the guidance you need to do better, to be more competitive on impact. That's the goal. But we're going to keep this idea of empathic connection running through this section, and I'll suggest how you might apply some of these tips to co-producing a proposal that has real impact. So this idea that it's not just us coming up with the ideas, and we're not just being informed by the people we're connecting with after we've done our 3I analysis, but we're actually getting them engaged and helping to design the impact elements as far as possible. And I would suggest that that makes for an even more competitive approach to impact in your proposal. So, as I said, we're starting with some more generic tips, but my hope is that some of these will be new to you, and they are all critical to success, because it doesn't matter how great the impact element is in your proposal. If the rest of it isn't right, then you won't get funded to do that impactful work. These tips come from my experience having won significant amounts of funding. So in the last 4 years, since I joined Scotland's Rural College, where I currently work, I'm sitting on a 68% success rate, and that's across 27 funded projects that I brought in during that time. And that's worth over £1.5 million just to my institution. And so the message I'm suggesting here is that my proposals aren't necessarily any more academically significant or creative than anyone else's, but there are techniques that you can use that can increase your funding success rates. I'm also speaking from experience, having sat on a number of panels, mainly in the UK, but also EU level, and various European countries for national funders. And I've helped to write funding calls with funders as well. So that's the basis upon which I'm drawing these recommendations. And of course, by trading, I also get lots of other recommendations from others who sit on panels in different contexts. So I'm going to bring all of this together, and hopefully this will transform your success rate, and in particular, the impact element of your next bid. So, first part on increasing success rates, let's dive straight into that. And I'm going to just give you one slide and then a tool for you to go away and try. And in this single slide, I'm going to give you 5 strategic tips that can make a really big difference to your success rate. The first seems obvious, but it's something that I think we all need to think a lot more deeply about in terms of whether we really fit the scope of a call. We have a habit of looking through rose-tinted spectacles and seeing what we want to see in a call. We see all the keywords that link to our area, and often don't have the objectivity to realize that actually we're kind of more tangentially related. And so if that is the case, then it is unlikely that you will be successful. So I'm going to suggest that this is the #1 reason people fail before they have even started writing their proposal. So get a second opinion, especially from people who've been there, done that, who know what works, and really check that you fit the scope of the call before proceeding further, and try and be more objective. Get that help. The second decision that we need to make is whether we are competitive to lead a proposal or whether we need to follow. There's an institutional element to that. So at Scotland's Rural College, we don't have the infrastructure to lead Horizon Europe bids. So that's just an instant no for me. But equally, your career stage matters as well. And so it's worth asking whether you are right as the PI, or whether in fact it's has more value for you to lead a work package in someone else's bid and to approach them with your idea. And although they benefit from all of your idea, at least you get that one work package in a successful bid led by someone who has the experience and the credibility to actually bring that funding in. The third point then is that we tend to headhunt work package leaders and other team members based on their academic expertise, but you can also headhunt people with funder track record and even people with panel experience. And very often this gives us a competitive advantage because we now have people who are self-motivated to give us all of their wisdom and experience to help us read between the lines of the call and to appeal to panelists as well as reviewers in a way that is very difficult to do if you have no experience at all. In addition to that, you can headhunt people with impact. And if you think that you don't have enough expertise, enough track record on impact, then that's not a problem, because there are people who do. And now they can lead a work package on impact, and you can learn from them through the course of your project. And I'm not just talking here about the kind of consultancies who provide work packages on dissemination, engagement, and the like, who are great at social media, engaging with mass media, and all of that stuff. But these consultancies tend to focus on the engagement aspect. What I'm talking about here, to take this to a new level, is people who actually have sector-specific relationships, partnerships with the kinds of organizations that you ultimately want to benefit from that work. So I'm working at the moment on a Horizon Europe project where we have a consultancy who is doing a great job of all of our comms, but my responsibility is that deeper impact. And I was brought in to activate a United Nations network that I'm part of, along with Wetlands International, an NGO network that I'm part of. And then together we are working with multiple governments across Europe to come up with an impact strategy using the 3I analysis and the impact planning tool. And this international impact plan then is based on these partnerships and this inside intelligence about what will work in different contexts with different organizations, different politics. And that's the kind of stuff that you don't get from those comms type firms. And it's worth really thinking about whether there are people like that with those kind of partnerships and networks that you might bring in that could bring your impact to a new level in terms of its credibility. There is, I think, a critical and very well evidenced role for pre-review that can make a big difference. There's lots of peer-reviewed evidence that suggests that a robust pre-review process can significantly increase success rates. And the reason for this is obvious, which is that you are now able to predict the peer review and the panel feedback on your proposal in advance, respond to that feedback so that you get rid of any negatives, so that those reviewers and panelists are no longer able to comment on those negative aspects. You fixed them already and you get a higher mark. So very obvious, but underused. Most universities only have internal pre-review processes. And that's a problem because all of the most relevant people with the most relevant expertise in your institution are already on your bid. And so you tend to get quite generic feedback. And those kinds of feedback often miss if there is some kind of fundamental methodological flaw. These are not people on the cutting edge of your discipline. So they give you useful feedback, but you are missing a lot of the feedback you're going to get from the peer review college and from the panels. And of course, that's a problem. And so I recommend, take your internal process, that's fine, but add to that an external pre-review process. I tend to start with people in my international networks who I know will not be competing with me. There's no conflict of interest. But where I run out of those contacts, I then will go to my networks closer to home. And I'm looking for people who are experts in our field, who will deeply understand what I'm doing and who will be able to identify the biggest problems and will give me a much closer approximation to what the peer review college might say. Now, there are lots of different kinds of people I can go for. And of course, the first criterion is expertise, obviously. But in addition to this, I may also seek people with panel experience as well. And these people are going to be able to give me an even more useful assessment of how this is likely to play at the panel and the kind of things that I might want to fix from that perspective, which I'll get from nowhere else. And so the way that I do this is that I identify people who have previously served on panels for my funder, and these are all published. And I take this as a kind of a guess at the kinds of people who might be serving on the actual panel. And I ask my team, now, do you know any of these people? And I now get my colleagues to reach out to their contacts, to use their social capital to ask for a favor. These people are usually very busy, so they won't just do it. If you pay them, that won't make any difference. Their problem is time. But for a friend, they may do this. And so what I will typically is offer a review for a review. And so the person with the warmest contact will reach out and say, we're going into this call. We're wondering, could you give us a pre-review? This is when we're going to be looking for it. So I ask in advance. In return for this, I or the PI from our project would be very happy to give you a pre-review for one of your projects. And that favor for a favor often then gets you that review. In some cases, the person may come back to say, actually, I'm going to be on that panel. I've got a conflict of interest. In my case, what I tend to do is I say, okay, thanks for telling me. I would still love it if you could give me a pre-review and simply declare a conflict and step out of the room, because that pre-review has more value to me than them being in the room and hating what they are reading. If your networks are not big enough and you don't have anyone like anyone on that named list, then you can use that named list to get a sense of the kind of people that typically serve on panels. And in particular, what you're looking for are biases here. So quite often you'll find a quantitative bias or qualitative bias, for example. And now you realize, actually, we're going to have a hard time if we're a bunch of qualitative researchers going into a call which says it funds qualitative research, but tends to appoint quantitative panelists, for example. And I either adapt my proposal or I go elsewhere. But I'm certainly finding people like that, even if I don't think they'll give me a fair hearing, because those are the kind of people that are likely to ultimately judge my proposal. And I'm going to my team and to my networks, and I'm saying, well, okay, none of us know these people. Do you know anyone who is like this? And I've kind of built this idea of an approximation of a panelist based on that data, and we're finding those people instead. So we're getting really intelligent now about our pre-review. It's external, it's expert, and where we can, we get people with a bit of panel experience as well. A final point on this is the power of ChatGPT to give you reviews. I went on a training course. I'll put a link if I can find it. I've just put it onto my X account. I need to put it onto LinkedIn. At a really nice training on using ChatGPT for grant writing. And for me, the most useful thing that I discover from this is that you can create your first draft. And before I even put this out for pre-review, I'm going to get the first review back from ChatGPT. So I send it my full draft. I send it the call for proposals. And then I ask it, is there anything missing or that's likely to get criticized from this proposal if those are the criteria? And the last time I did this, it was fascinating. I had read the call for proposals. I'd seen what I wanted to see in that. And there was an aspect of this that I thought was complete rubbish that was wrong and not needed. And so I just ignored it. And ChatGPT was much more objective than me and said, you know what, if you want to be successful in this, you can't ignore this, even if you think it's a load of rubbish, because that is a core part of this. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. I need to add something on this, annoyingly. And so that very objective look can actually be quite fascinating. And it's a good use, I would argue, for artificial intelligence when it comes to this process. Finally, I think that this goes against typical academic culture. We tend to work to deadlines, but where you have a sense of something that is likely to come up, and have a look at there's various bits of strategic documentation that will give you a sense of where a program might be headed in the future, where you think there are fundable areas. Build concept notes, a 2-pager. This is the kind of thing we're looking for. Build teams, get your impact partners in already, so that when that call comes out, you can activate your team and hit the ground running. And instantly, that gives you more time than everyone else, as everyone else is casting around trying to find team members. Do we think we can go for this or not? And that's at least a 2-week advantage, if not a month advantage over the competition. And if you use your time effectively from when the call comes out all the way through to that deadline, and I'm going to give you my project management tool for doing that, then that effectively works that at the point at which everyone else is submitting, it's as though the funder approached you and you alone and said, I'm giving you an extra month. And would that make a difference? Yes, of course it would. But of course, to get that benefit, you have to work with every week that you have between the call coming out and the deadline. And so this is my project management tool, and I'm going to show you how to use this to co-produce a proposal to draw on some of the lessons that we learned in the first session. I'll just share screen to this so you can see what this looks like. So here we are, and we've got about 3 months until the deadline. 3-4 months. And the first thing that we're doing here is that we have a rough draft case for support, and we're starting on writing that case because we already had that concept note that we'd co-produced. So we hit the ground running and we're actually writing the case. Fantastic. Already now, second week in, we are coming up with any non-academic partners. In this particular case, we needed case study partners. And we've got that long list. We're also long listing our potential pre-reviewers. And then in 3 weeks in, we're having a team meeting. That's how long it takes to get everyone's diaries organized. And in that, we're discussing that draft case for support, of course. But we're also prioritizing any non-academic partners, getting them engaged, and prioritizing our pre-reviewers. And in this particular call, you're allowed to identify and name reviewers on the application. And so if that is the case, depending on which funder you're going to, you need to make sure that you hold on to the reviewers for your application who do not have a conflict of interest with you and that you think might be positively disposed towards your proposal. Don't use them up as pre-reviewers. And then straight after this meeting, we're contacting our pre-reviewers. We're saying, we're going in for this call. We're going to get back to you in a couple of months' time over here, right on the right-hand side, bottom corner of your screen. So could you put aside an hour or two in this 2-week block 2 months from now? And that forward planning is what gets you, hopefully, a yes, along with that social capital, as I was suggesting earlier. Now, we are wanting to co-produce this with some non-academic partners. So we've got our rough draft case of support. We think we've got an idea of what we want to do. And we're now putting this out to our non-academic partners, but it's still in very much draft form. And we're saying to them that we may need a letter of support. Again, it depends on your funder as to whether that's desired or allowed. But more than that, we're not asking you to just rubber stamp this. We want you to actually feedback and help shape this. So in this case, I'm giving them 3 ways that they can engage. Here's a Google Doc, and you can directly comment on this and edit this if you want. There's a summary attached to this email, so just email me back based on the summary. Or there's a workshop in 3 weeks' time. Come along, listen to this, and talk back to us, whatever you prefer. As we come to that workshop, I'm making sure that I've got a draft budget with some wiggle room so that I can bring new partners on, exploit these great ideas that are going to come out of the workshop, and it's not all set in stone at that point. We have our workshop. We then revise this based on their feedback, and now we've got a second draft. This is now a much higher quality draft that is co-produced, and that's what is going to go out to our pre-reviewers. And here we are now in that final phase, and it goes to the pre-reviewers. As soon as we start getting them back, we're adapting this in response to them. If we need them, we're getting our letters of support, finalizing everything a good week before the deadline for our colleagues in professional services. And one final thing, just to look at the tabs at the bottom here. Each of those parts of that Gantt chart, I'm putting as to-do list items, and I can color code these and decide where we are. So each meeting, each email update to the team, everyone can just in a click look and see where we are. And especially I can manage if we're behind schedule on anything. This is a tool that I was taught by a project manager when I joined a Russell Group University. So this is one of the top universities in the UK. And to my surprise, I was told by my boss that he wanted me to lead what was at the time the largest funding proposal of my career, and that he would give me a project manager to help do this. I'd never been given a project manager for a grant proposal before. It was both the most successful grant, because we got it and it was the biggest, and the most relaxed grant writing experience I've ever had. And I swore to myself that day I would learn everything I could from this project manager and apply it to every other bid that I have since applied, and of course share it with others. So this is my attempt to, in the first half, give you a few pointers to what we can do to enhance our success rates. Time for some questions or comments, and then we're going to dive into the impact sections. Most of this is going to be through discussion, but I am going to give you a few pointers at the end as well. So thoughts, comments, questions on what you've heard so far? Hey.
I have one very short question, but here you basically write long list potential non-academic partners. It's all about non-academic partners. Mm-hmm. Is that different from academic partners, or is it a different strategy for that? How do you put that into the picture?
So my suggestion is that in an ideal world, we are building our team in terms of our academic partners around a concept note before the calls come out. And so I've at the moment, I've got 2 teams that I've got built, activated, ready to apply when a relevant call comes out. When the call comes out, it may not be quite matching everyone's interest. So we now have a subset of that group who are going to go in for this particular call. And the key thing is that I'm leaving some flexibility. So we've got a core academic team. Usually I've got at least one impact partner on there, one non-academic partner on the team already at that early stage. And then we're deciding who else do we need in terms of non-academic partners. But at that workshop where our non-academic partners are saying, actually, you need to do stuff on this and on that, I often then revisit the academic partners, because actually, if we're going to do stuff on that idea, we need some additional academic expertise. And so we're leaving this as flexible as possible, both for our non-academic partners to join and give us ideas, but also so that we can bring in new academic partners as necessary based on what they say is necessary. And the reason I do it that way around is that if I set the team in advance based on the academic expertise, all the funding is taken, basically. All the great ideas now come out from our non-academic partners, and yeah, we have to veto all of these things because no, we don't have the expertise, we can't do that, and I can't chuck anyone out. We're already at capacity, so I try and leave a bit of flexibility. Does that make sense? Does that help, Pia?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, great. Sorry, maybe it wasn't Pia. Sorry. Anyway, Nika, was it? Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Let's move into the impact element now and think a bit more about how we can apply what we learned in the previous session. Sorry, that was my recap. Let's just zoom straight to the point. So what we're going to do is, first of all, have a think about the kinds of impacts that you want to achieve. And as I said, ideally, you're doing this by doing your 3I analysis. You're reaching out to people. You're asking them what are the things they want to see. Of course, in Horizon Europe, you have expected impacts as well. You have to write to. But the point I was making earlier is, great, we write to those expected impacts, but we can go beyond those. And that can include being even more ambitious, but it also can include the early stage impacts as well. So things like changing understanding and awareness, building capacity and preparedness, changing attitudes, changing behaviors, changing policies, practices, and the like, which ultimately then lead to those perhaps expected impacts on the far right-hand side. And I can now frame all of these as impacts if I want. And the fact that I'm framing them as impacts and putting them in causal order, where one thing leads to the next and leads to the next, as a reviewer, now, when I get to those expected impacts, I can see exactly how you got there and all of the added value in terms of other impacts that you will get on the way there. And this is now much more credible. That's my suggestion. So first of all, I wanted to just to illustrate that, apply that point to this. Much more in the book in terms of those different types of impact, how you identify them, how you evaluate them, all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to start with a very brief overview, but I want most of our time to be in discussion mode. But we will then do a bit of a wrap up and think about the key ingredients. But my hope is that most of them will come from you. We'll see. So very briefly, some of the things you might want to look for, if you haven't spotted these already, is whether impact is part of the problem statement in some way. Is there an articulation of why we need these impacts? What is the problem that is being solved or the opportunity that's being exploited? And that's exactly as you would do it for your research questions and goals. And there is this link. So in the same way that each research question or goal has its roots in a problem you are solving, a gap in the literature or whatever it might be, it's the same thing with your impact goals. So we link each of these to a problem statement. And then there is an activity to enable us to reach each of those goals in the same way that we have methods to deliver answers to those research questions. It's exactly the same. And then we integrate that into our work plan. This can be integrated across all your work packages. It could be a dedicated work package. It could be an applied research and impact work package and a comms package. There's lots of different ways that you can do this. The key thing is that it is explicit and clear. And in the same way that you identify research outputs in terms of a number of papers, potential venues, the kind of contributions they'll make to the literature, let's get specific about impacts. And the question is, how specific are these proposals on impact? So what I'm going to do is move you into your breakout rooms. They're going to be slightly larger than they were previously. It's going to be a 12-minute breakout room. And do's and don'ts, strengths and weaknesses, ideas you liked or hated. I'm going to ask you, everyone, every single person, to write one thing in the chat when you come back. That's the goal. So any questions, put them in the chat or just hang around. I wonder how you got on with that. So in the chat, I've put the evaluator feedback for the Wet Horizons project, which was one of them, which we know scored 5 out of 5 for impact. We don't know the score of the other one for impact, but we know they were both funded. And if, like me, you've spotted a bunch of things that could have been better in the Wet Horizons bid, then I'm going to suggest this is a sign of hope that actually, if this is all you need to do to get 5 out of 5, then it's maybe not as hard as you thought, because there is certainly lots of room for improvement in that proposal, in my view. But what was it that you liked about either proposal, or what did you dislike? What would you avoid? And let's get those more generalizable comments into the chat, please. And maybe if I can ask Tanya just to speak. I was in a group with Tanya. If it's annoying you having us speak over you, just turn us down as you type. I want everyone to write one thing, a lesson you learned from that discussion, please, in the chat. But Tanya, this point about specificity, tell me a bit more about your perspective on that.
Yeah, I really liked how you did this stakeholders analysis really thoroughly. And I like when you're writing down the organizations you that are interested in your research, you've put in contacts of persons with their name and surname, that you know that they will read your email, they will reply to your phone call, they will, you know, talk about your project to their colleagues, they will resend it to those who could also be interested. I think this is really important.
Yeah, yeah, really powerful. And I think I'm going to suggest my take-home message, if you remember nothing else about this, is specificity equals credibility. I can wave my arms around and say, we'll work with this government, we'll achieve these goals, but I don't believe you until you start getting specific. And now I believe you actually know what you're talking about. You might actually be able to do this stuff. So important. And interestingly, yeah, the Wet Horizons, well, its impact goals are not very specific. I think they could be much better, but it gets better as you move through.
So writing this impact, it is a very practically psychoanalytically demanding work, and you have to be really emotionally and scientifically developed or credible or mature to write inspiring story. And I think not too much technical, because in these cases I didn't like this technical style of writing. But of course the things should be specified.
Yeah. Great, I agree. So there is this idea of hearts and minds and inspiring our readers, and impact is a place where we can absolutely do that. I agree. And I think it is possible, as you're suggesting, Rebecca, to be specific without having to be overly technical or using too much jargon.
Yes.
Yeah, Pia also...
Interest is the hardest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Put well, thank you. Pia also pointing out just that those connections, directing challenges towards specific stakeholders. Simona making that those connections really clear, effectively mapping them. And yeah, finding specific ways to partners is a key area where you need help. And I'd suggest start with your 3I analysis. You can do it yourself. Do it with your project team. And if you're struggling, then bring in 1 or 2 people from outside who are warm contacts and get them to help you with this. As we saw already, by doing this in discussion, you can get much further. And this is what then gives you the ways in to now have conversations and to get those much more specific inputs to your proposal. And that's why I recommend co-producing this as far as possible. We'll see what else comes into the chat, but for now, I wanted to highlight how you can use both of these tools as bid writing tools, starting early on by identifying who is relevant, why they're relevant, reaching out to them, getting them engaged, and if nothing else, learning from those conversations, but potentially even getting them involved in creating that impact plan. And for a large project, having a logical, systematic approach, such as an impact planning template, like the one I've given you, is what enables you now to be both specific and credible. You won't have time, you will have space to put everything in, but it may be that there are elements of this that you can tabulate, and it is the detail that you get through this process that enables you to be specific enough to be credible. I think we have covered all of these other points, if not in the chat, then previously. But if there's anything that you want me to dig into, then we can do that after the end. But I want to conclude with one final tool, an impact map. This idea that we are going to have all of these 4 things, and we map our problem statement to our goals. These goals deliver on that problem and help these people. So we've got our problem statement mapped to our goals and our beneficiaries. Each goal benefits a specific group. And if you've got a group without a goal, maybe they're not relevant. They shouldn't actually be involved. And if they are, then I need to so get rid of them if they're not relevant. That's another project for another time, or I keep them in and I come up with a new impact for them. I've got now engagement activities that will deliver on each of those goals that are also suited to each of those different beneficiaries. And if I've got an activity I want to do, I make sure that I link it to each of those other activities. Media engagement, social media engagement is often something that is not very well connected. Why are we actually doing this? And maybe it's because, oh, we actually do have a public understanding of science kind of goal that we need to add in here. So it's we make sure that each activity has a goal, has a group that we're trying to reach it, to give that goal to. And of course, that then links to the research, and we have that connectivity built through our proposal. But if you remember nothing else, it is these three things in the pink triangle, and to map them together. And in so doing, we get a sense of whether this is working. Where are there gaps? And as we fill those gaps, we turn this into something which is both more comprehensive and more coherent as a proposal. Framed with an effective problem statement, that is even more powerful. And using that impact planning template, we're also then able to identify the risks ourselves and how we might mitigate them, rather than leaving that to our reviewers. So much more on my website, but I'm going to conclude things at this point and signpost you to my newsletter. Lots more follow-up training. I'll put links into the chat. And your next step now is to go and do that 3I analysis and stay in touch with each other and with me, and let me know how you get on. So I'm going to conclude and hand over to Tanya to close, and put those links in the chat as I promised, as she speaks. But thank you, everyone. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for participating in this training, Fast Track Your Research Impact with Mark Reed. I believe we all have gained new knowledge, new ideas. I'm sure you will use the pieces of it when you will be writing your next project proposal. If you're considering applying for the Hoedsklad, please contact me or my colleagues here at the Knowledge Transfer Office. We will be happy to answer your questions. Also, I would like to invite you to our next event on the topic of social impact. This is the Uniminds Festival, Festival of Science and Innovation. First day of the festival will be October 14th, and it will take place at the Faculty of Public Administration, so Fakulteta za upravo. Our guest, Jessica Meyer, will speak about social impact in the Netherlands. She will also conduct an interactive workshop on this topic. So please join us. It will be fun. Thank you for your attention, and see you at the Uniminds Festival.